Welcome to Carolina Sculptor Studio. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 131 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. As we're progressing on this stone, down here, this is her feet, moving up her body. This is that knee point we shot way back in the very beginning. Now I'm starting to cut on the back side of her body, okay, on the side towards the die. Now, I mentioned this before, this is getting into, you got to have it right territory. I'm comfortable with what I've shot over here, and so I'm going to start relieving the back side. I want to start cutting away where it can't be fixed, okay, because if I have to move her knee over 6 inches right now, which isn't going to happen. That'd be a total disaster on this project. If I had to move her knee over 6 inches, now I can't because I cut that stone away. Comfortable with what I shot here. This all looks okay. It looks good. If I need to shift it a little bit, I can, but I'm happy. So I'm starting to take away stone on her other side. Now, we've been cutting. This is one of those things that you have to keep your head on straight and not lose track of what you're doing. We watched a TV show the other day, old repeat of the challenge where they got to make stuff and they've got certain parameters, and one of the guys missed the length parameter by like an inch. Just total brain fart. He got so sucked up into it that he was going and he had to beat the clock or whatever, and he totally didn't realize that he could have just cut off, an inch or still getting over this cold. Cut off an inch or whatever and be fine, but he missed that thing and he was disqualified. Bam, he's out. It's done. Okay. We've been carving this with relative impunity, okay, because we're going from this side, we're cutting this side away, just cutting it off, we don't have to worry about anything, we just have to keep our points where they need to be, and everything will be great and whatever. Now we're over here, we're hogging this out, and we're cutting down, and I'm almost to the point, I'm getting close to it, but saw down in a little bit, I gotta slow down, because over here, why I went ahead and marked it. I don't know if you can see it. See this line? This is where the die is, the die portion. Okay? We're going to sink the front of this stone back about an inch, which includes we're going to have to panel that whole die. That's a lot of work. We're going to have to do a panel on that. Well, I showed you how to panel stuff way back, squaring the block, doing this base behind me for this stone, everything. So it's not going to be a problem for us to do it, but we've got to do it. The problem is I've got to open this up to reach this. And you could go and get real crazy and just start hogging stone out and take your saw and run a cut and run right up into that face, and then you're screwed. Okay? So be careful. Take your time. Make sure that you understand what you're doing. And this goes back in some ways to and I keep saying, don't surrender volume. You have to be careful about how you approach your point so that you not erode the material around it. Okay, this is a huge example of that, because this has to be nice and straight and square, and we want to do this really well. I don't want to cut up to the edge of that until I'm ready to cut it, because in part, we've got to have a flat wall. Now remember, I added this wash or this curve, this small scotia here at the bottom. I added that in for some design character considerations and for some technical consideration. It makes the die look a little more artsy and fantastic, cool, where it sways and goes instead of just being a square block of stone. But where the tension on her drapery is over here, where she's leaning towards the stone or sort of rotating towards the stone, and her drapery's pulling over here, that would have created a big void down here in the bottom. I don't want to have to carve 8 inches back and square that up with very nominal clearance, because it's really, it's difficult to do it and have it look good. You can do it, it's time and money. And if I can fill this and make it look better and skip that all at the same time, I want to. But I don't want this. This is what you consider to be a second figure in terms of carving. When you carve something like an angel, you've got a full length, you've got one figure with the body, and you've got a second figure with the wings. Okay? They have to agree. They have to land correctly in relationship with each other. You can't have an angel and then have her wings clear over here. They've got to fit perfectly. Okay? And so everything's got to work. This is another figure because we want her to just barely be leaning up against that. So I don't want to cut, even though I drew that line and that's where it is, I don't want to cut to that line now. I want to cut, and leave an inch or so I can carve her and finish her and get her up to that perfect agreement, and then square that face off so that face matches perfectly. Because if I square that face, get it all nice, and then I carve her and it doesn't fit, I may have to push that over a 1/4 inch to make it match. I don't want to do that. I want it to be done once. So leave yourself some space. Remember, you've got that other figure there. You don't really need to draw the whole thing on the stone all at once because you'll rub the lines off, but you do have to mark them and keep track of where you're at. Okay? So keep digging here, swinging this, and we'll keep going right up and get her figure put together. Back to cut. Take a look at this. Now that I have that point, you just approximate that fold down into this point. Wipe all that out. See, now I know I could push all this back if I wanted to. Right now I'm going to wait. I'm going to develop her and carve that into the edge, okay? So, got this point right up about flush with the knee. We'll go ahead. I'll probably leave that line just a little bit tall. I'll push that back and get it fairly even, but I won't make sure that it's flat between those points. Just leave extra. And we'll start working up in here. Start curving her over. It's coming good. All right, I want to explain a couple things. Right now, if we get our handy dandy pointer. This drapery, okay, this is the tip of her knee, all right? And this line here represents this major line of drapery right here, okay? So we've got this line right here, and we just shot this point. Now, remember I was talking about leaving room here to carve up to this and then carve this away. I talked about relieving the backside or cutting material away where you can't fix it, okay? Because there's still material here, and because I haven't cut down here, I could still shift this a little bit. We've got a little bit of, we got some wiggle room here. If we have to, if we have to shift that knee just a tiny bit, because there's a hole here that might be too deep. If we have to turn it just a little bit, give her more of sort of a curtsy and still look natural, we can still tweak that leg a little bit. So we don't want to cut this off here. But to continue this up, we've got this point here. To cut here, I don't know. We've got to cut a point in here. We also have to start developing these lines up on top. And so in order to cut here, we're going to have to dig a bunch of stone out. So if we cut down to this level, and we cut down to this level, and we don't evacuate the backside, we'll already have this stone off. It'll make it easier to sink here and make sure that we're happy before we cut that and relieve that backside, because we're getting into tight territory here, okay? So probably what we're going to do now is I'm going to start developing this line, and then I'll develop this line. We'll put these points in, we'll be able to contour that and get that pretty close. And if we cut this and then go over here and go straight down approximately to this and leave at least some material here, because these are nearly an inch apart on the model, that means that if that's 2/3, it should be 1.5 inches apart on the job. So we'll still have some room to tweak that if we have to move this knee over slightly just to get that thigh turned a little bit to deal with that low spot I think I've got on one point there. But now I want to shoot these. It's important to plan how you're going to cut. We don't want to cut any of this because we're still going to drop that leg down. We got to extend this 1 inch. We're adding 1 inch between here and the bottom on the actual stone. So we'll put that together as we stand her up and carve it. Now, I talked about these points being approximations. We're enlarging the stone, and we're going to have our, connect the dots sort of, I don't know, strategy, whatever you want to call it. That doesn't mean that anywhere along the job, once we start stand her up and really start carving her, that doesn't mean that I can't shoot a point and say, I don't understand where this is. I want this to be exactly there, because we may find it's beneficial to shoot a point very accurately during the carving instead of just using these general landmarks as approximations and then carving the rest direct. So it's up to you. But now I'm going to go and I'm going to start developing this. I got to realize that if this stretches down 1 inch, it may change this fold. It may turn it just a little bit. So I don't want to commit anything below that knee. I want to stay up top here where I've got some room to make that drapery flow. And that's one of the big reasons to carve her standing up, the bulk of it if you can, because it's so easy to carve them laying down, and then you stand them up and it looks like they're cockeyed drunk. They forgot gravity exists, and everything's kind of bent the wrong way, and it doesn't fall pendant, or it isn't under the right tension because she's angled the wrong way. So well, let's start. We'll lay out these points and shoot some more points and keep pushing that top off. I want to talk about a technical detail that I brought up in terms of carving this figure and the edge of this die, okay? And this is a critical thing to understand in terms of agreement between components in a carving or between figures. Like we've got a mother and a child, you may have a mother and their cheek to cheek, or he's just touching their cheek, if you do a marrying child or whatever you're doing. And this is I don't want to say a pitfall, a problem. This is a challenge that I've brought it up before, briefly in other videos, but we really haven't addressed it yet here. there's a lot of people that have difficulty carving multiple figure elements where you got to have really nice agreement between two figures. And that's something it spans everybody. There's some carvers and some sculptors that do a really good job with it, and there's some that could do a lot better job with it. And there's some guys that simply avoid it like the plague because they know where it can go and they know what can go wrong. And so if somebody's good at it, they let them do it. I have had good success with it, and so there were a number of projects, even during my apprenticeship and stuff, where they got shifted to me because they seemed to, they just did, mine came out good. A lot of people that get into carving that don't come up carving. See, I never grew up doing clay and modeling and doing additive, where you can add clay to it, a piece at a time on a tool or on your finger or whatever, which whoever just instructs you tells you what's right and what's wrong and how you're supposed to do it. And there's different schools of thought, but when you model something, you're taking clay or you're taking a plastic media like wax, and you add it and you build up, and you start with an armature and you build up, and they get tight, and they, if you do 2 or 3 things, they get tight, and if it's not just right, you just bend it because it's plastic. And when I say plastic, I mean plasticity. I'm talking about it's flexible and soft and it moves. I'm not talking about a piece of plastic, okay? The problem when you start carving is that you are reducing material. And so you define an object or an element of an object, and you produce it by reducing to that final surface. And that's where you get into problems with carving multiple elements and their ultimate agreement as to how they work. Because people will carve, and I don't know, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. I'm going to use these 2 tubes here, just because they come together in a line. Most people will carve this round. They'll say, okay, these are going to meet right here, and they carve a line. Okay, they carve a line where they're going to meet, and then they carve it, and then they carve it, and they try to make it really even or round or whatever. And as they carve it, what naturally happens is that it reduces in size, okay? That's where you get into a problem, because in order to maintain this correct radius, this correct diameter and radius, you carve this, and a lot of people will end up chasing it because they've defined this, and so they'll chase it. And what happens is, as they carve it and this gets smaller and this gets smaller, they tend to migrate apart. And I don't know, I try to think of what I could show. I didn't go hunting for some of the stones that are in the cemetery where Mary's holding the Christ child, and the Christ child is like way back here, and she's way back here, and it looks like each one's got bad breath and the other one can smell it, and they're like kind of like she's holding them from running away because they're stressed apart. They're not leaning in with that perfect contact. And that's what I mentioned with this side right here, where I'm not going to cut this down. If I start carving her perfect and I put this wall together, as I carve her, she's going to reduce in size. Okay, she's going to get smaller and smaller. And what that's going to do is she's going to migrate away from this die over here. And so I want to carve her in a way that I'm going to have her land with excellent agreement and hopefully some volume up against this stone, so it looks like she's up against it, because that's the whole point, so I don't have to carve a great big long deep slot down in between or just leave it filled in like I didn't carve it, which is, a lot of people end up doing. And I'm we'll have some work at some point that'll show this exercise. But when you have multiple elements like this, you have to learn to carve them in a way that you will end at their agreement, not that you'll begin at their agreement. Okay, where they touch, where they're tangent, how they fit together in space, and it's the same process as I recommend for carving floral work, because a lot of people will carve the center of a flower, and a flower will be able to be all, you'll have all these leaves that are curled together or whatever, all these petals, and they all look really cool, and they'll carve those, and then they keep carving them, and they go from here until it's all flopped open, and you got this flaccid looking flower like it's dead and it's falling apart, instead of a nice tight blossom. But if I was going to carve this, just say for instance I had to carve this, I would start by cutting the outside of it, and I would define it progressively towards the agreement. Okay, just like I'm going to carve her, I'm going to carve her, and I'm going to carve her, and hopefully what I'll end up doing is I will carve her to a point that there'll still be some overhang on this line. And then I can go back and take this line down to make it square or vertical. It'll be standing up, because this has to be vertical, standing up on the joint down here. When the stone stands up, this has to be straight up and down, and it has to be square back in. And so after I get her all carved, this will still be kind of jagged and undefined. I'm not going to worry about that too much until I get that arm straightened out, so that arm looks right. She doesn't have a great big long wonky arm like we talked about. But when you're doing multiple figures, or you want a really good agreement, you've got to understand what you're carving. And so for this job, we'll pretend this is her body. This is her left thigh and hip and everything that's up against the stone. We're going to carve this, and I'm going to carve this, and I'll undercut this edge so that this would be where the die would be. It would be nice and square, sticking up like this. And I'm going to carve down into this and probably leave this to where it's tipped a little bit, so that I can go back in and square this up in order to have a really perfect agreement and have great volume with her. So it doesn't look like she's skinny. It doesn't look like there's a gap in there. So, and we'll get into more of this later, but this is a really, really, really critical concept that you need to learn and need to understand. When you start carving things that have to agree, you have to carve them in a way that they still agree at the end, and not that they get smaller and smaller and smaller and spread apart as you carve them. And that's the problem that people have when they're used to doing clay versus doing reductive work like carving, because you can't just fix this, and you'll just shrink and shrink and shrink, and all of a sudden you've got these two little weird things that don't agree anymore. Okay? Back to work. Yeah, I want to show you. Starting to, maybe this will help you see better, I'm not sure. Shot 2 or 3 more points up here. This is right up just below her waist. And so I was able to carry this line of drapery, and this is an approximation. I stayed up a little bit because I think she's a little thin. I'd like to have a little more abdomen shown. So I stayed up there a little bit, but I went over the right distance and then matched it with this. And so I've got that line. You can see that by stripping off, and then between this point and this point is approximately a straight line, so I can strip that off. We can start taking off a lot of stone. Now I could contour this over down to this drapery, but I'm going to wait. I want to do a couple of pieces of drapery up on by her hip up here. Carry this down over. Here's the corner of the stone, of the die. and I'll start working this down like we talked about. But I figured I'd go ahead and get a couple here just to make sure all look good. Then we'll do a little bit on this line, we'll do a little bit on this line, and then we'll get down to match this line. We'll be down in here and still have enough edge there that we're not crowding it at all. And should look pretty good. But now that we're not just setting up all these disparate points that are all over the place, it's pretty boring at first when you start doing this, because you're going to have to put in a bunch of points that they're just where they are. And you can either just work from one point and just radiate out and do it all up, or do some of what I did, where I started and I did some and I got this together. I got her arm together, her cuff, you know, the bottom of her cuff. This is approximately her cuff right here. So we still got material to take off here, but we can cut that off, undercut it later. And this is the top of her arm is in here, but we left it tall, so we had room to shift it a little bit. Now we can start getting her shaped to where we'll have the cylindrical, whatever, ovoid cylinder of her lower body together, and get that in, and it'll look pretty good. Because what we're trying to do is get this mass together, so then we can stand it up and really start carving her, and have a very accurate approximation of her. Just getting rid of the bulk, instead of thinking we're right there and then finding out we're half an inch or 3/4 of an inch or even a couple inches off from where we should be. And even though we're going back here, we still got a number of points that are nowhere near an inch back. We're going to be an inch back on the plinth down here on the bottom. She's going to be very forward. There should be some really good motion in this. And it's, you know, it'll be fun to do a video at the very end when she's all finished, and we can put a little bit of this different stuff in to show you where it looked like, what it looked like beforehand. But when we stand her up, she'll be in the, you know, mock-up stage, and you should be able to see her before we stand her up. She should look pretty good. But I think this video is probably long enough at this point that we can go ahead and wrap this one up and get started on the next one. I'll just keep on shooting points. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio with a Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.